Hey y'all, it's Wildcat 6305 coming at you from Ike's Treehouse outside of Augusta, Georgia. This is my final video of my House Rules series and the final video of my R&D sub-series of my House Rules series. And we're going to be covering the R&D tech tree. And this is really what I call the centerpiece of my R&D technology, of my R&D rules. You get the choice to choose technologies. Now, granted, now it's broken down into 6 research areas and 4 phases for each area. So, granted, you can't just pick veteran infantry right out the gate. You got to choose from. You got to work your way through phase 1 column to phase 2 to phase 3 to phase 4 of a given research area. And they're all independent of each other, except for one exception of mass production is a requirement prior to aircraft and naval production. But I'll get into that once we get going. But this is really the centerpiece that everyone that has played this system so far really enjoys. It's not tied to turns. It's not tied to at turn 8. Because a lot of times it's kind of maybe hard to get to turn 8. You may not even get that research. So everybody that's played it so far has really liked it, and hopefully y'all enjoy it too. So I'm just going to go through this research area or at a time, and the 6 research areas. I'll turn it this way here so you can see it fully. But the 6 research areas are going from right to left: economy, infantry, armor, aircraft, artillery, and naval. So I'm just going to work down the list and go through everything. So hopefully you'll find something fun and something worth, hey, I want to check this out. I like that rule. It seems kind of cool. So first off, economy techs. The first one up is mass production. This is your first level tech, and it's pretty much very similar to out of box of your industrial complexes. Both increase the amount of the amount of units that they can produce. I'm trying to move the camera around and get it somewhere where you can see it the best there. So mass production is similar to out of box. Minors go up to being able to produce 4. Majors can produce up to 12, and your damage when repairing industrial complexes is now half price. Remove 2 tokens for 1, so half price. But the one thing I did modify and add is for major industrial complexes that have 2 or more production slots unused during the mobilized units phase, you can collect 1 IPC per industrial complex during the collect income phase. So if you have 2 major industrial complexes and you only produced 8 out of them, then you would get 2 IPCs, 1 for each. Just kind of to me, just, hey, you had the slots left. Everybody's trying to mobilize. Each nation was trying to mobilize their war effort and have their production just slammed with military units. But in the case that you didn't have something, then they were able to do something else and make money on the side. I don't know if that's historically accurate, but that's where my brain's working on that one. Second one is war bonds. This is pretty much same thing like out of box, just slightly modified. You roll 2d6 dice and you collect that many additional IPC of the higher die. And for UK, London gets the higher die and Calcutta gets the lower die. veteran researchers, R&D technology, or veteran researchers. So that means that when you roll an R&D die, instead of getting a breakthrough at 1, if you have veteran researchers enabled, you can either break through at 2 or less. So shoots like a defending infantry, or artillery. So it increases that chance of getting a breakthrough. Move on over to Nobel researchers. So these are higher level researchers that are trying to develop these technologies for your nation. So Nobel researchers break through at a 3 or less. So now your R&D dice are like tanks, if that makes sense. And one extra bonus that Nobel researchers add is that the formula, if you will, to when you capture a capital, you take the amount of text that the capital has and divide by 2 and a minimum of 1. You get 1. You get that tech. Well, the formula changes a little bit with Nobel researchers, because Nobel researchers are going to be a little bit more protective of the research, right? So it's going to still be that number of text divided by 2, you round it down, but then it's going to be -1. So in the scenario of you captured a capital that has 3 texts, well, 3 divided by 2 is 1.5, rounded down to 1, -1 is 0. So that's just kind of something to be thinking of, and it's possible to capture a capital and then you don't get any text if they had Nobel researchers enabled. So I just kind of felt like those were kind of some fun economy ones to kind of add some value to it. And one thing that I probably should have said before I got through my first research area, but these are a mix. These technologies are a mix. There's probably about, of the 24 that I have, I probably came up with 5 of them on my own. There's probably 5 that are untouched out of box, and then the other 14 are some variant or either out of box that I've modified, or other people have modified, or house rules that I've read in the community or seen YouTube videos on. Community-based research, R&D that I've enabled, technologies that I've brought into my game as well. So just kind of keep that in mind. So I meant to say that earlier. Not everything in here is. I mean, this is not mine 100%. A lot of other people I've taken a lot of other people's ideas and applied them into this. Next research area, infantry techs. Just one note in general about infantry techs. Infantry attack and defensive bonuses do not stack higher than 3. That's just kind of a general rule. So I tried to eliminate the situations where that may occur, but like I said, in general, they're not allowed to stack higher than 3. So sometimes it may be a choose between whether the tech's enabled or whether they have a combined arms, but it may not be both in some circumstances. So the first one, infantry conscription. So this one, a lot of people are probably familiar with this, but just you receive 2 free infantry units during the purchase new units phase, and you can place them in any of your controlled territories during the mobilized units phase. Paratroopers and air transports. So this one is a little bit different, or is different from out of box. Rather than just being able to move infantry from air base, I'm saying you need a strategic bomber that at air bases, that a strategic bomber has a choice to, in lieu of loading bombs, they can load infantry, and they can load up to 2 infantry apiece. And you denote this by taking this token, which this is a Sired Blood paratrooper token that I've sized down and put on a sticker, and then put on this little wooden coin. So you put the strategic bomber on top of it, and you can either put the two paratroopers on each of their own paratrooper markers, or you can just grab a chip and bam, you got two of them like that. Either way, really doesn't matter. But like I said, at an air base, a strategic bomber can load infantry and in lieu of bombs. And so then with that strategic bomber, it can move its normal range, but you can either transport them, and meaning the movement ends in a friendly, the movement ends with the paratrooper still on board the strategic bomber, or now their transport in a friendly zone, or you can do a paradrop. The paradrops do not have to be in conjunction with another attack on that territory. Kind of as said in Band of Brothers, they're airborne. You know, the paratroopers are supposed to be surrounded. So I'm not saying that you can't just drop paratroopers in somewhere, but if you drop them in without another attack going on, then they'll have to fight till the end. Essentially, they can't retreat if they don't have anywhere to retreat to. Yeah, but getting back in here, transporting paratroopers and dropping them and transporting them to a drop zone is considered a combat move. The turn that paratroopers drop, they attack at a +1 that turn. But then once that turn's over, then they return to being normal infantry. All right. So they don't stay paratroopers. They're only paratroopers on the turn that they jump out of the plane. Essentially, the paradrops are a combat move as well, and paradrops happen before the resolve combat phase. So this is kind of like the strategic bombing rules, because you got to see if the guy lands first, right, before the paratrooper can attack in combat. To me, that makes sense. So at first, so the air transport is subject to AA fire, but they're not subject to interception. So kind of like a strategic bombing raid, you go through that same process, but they can't be intercepted because they're going to be firing flak up at them, and you're going to have a bunch of guys jumping out of planes with strings, and what are you going to intercept them with? Propeller-driven fighters. You're not going to send a propeller-driven fighter up there when you got weight on the end of a parachute and strings. You're going to kill your guys. Or at least that's what I'm saying. I'm not saying historically there was never a paradrop where fighters didn't go up and fight them, but that's what I'm saying in my mind, and it makes it for a cleaner rule. So if the plane gets turned away, which that's a rule later on that I'll cover, if it gets turned away, no drops are made. So essentially the drop gets made before the combat, and then the infantry can actually attack in the combat if they made it out. If the plane gets hit on a roll of 1, you get to see whether or not the paratrooper jumped before it, whether they jumped as the plane was burning on fire and they jumped out and made it, or they jumped out before the plane got hit, whatever story you want to fill. But on a roll of 1, they jumped before the plane took a hit. But they lose their +1 attack bonus for that round, so you get to keep the infantry, but you lose the plane, and they lose their advantage because now they're shaken, essentially, almost kind of like a kamikaze. Paratroopers do not combine arms with artillery, so they don't get a +1 with artillery. And then the other thing, combat bonus chips, such as that the defender may have in either the next rule entrenchment or in my house rules of amphibious assaults. The paratrooper, since it's kind of a special forces unit, it can remove 1 CBC per unit on a roll of 1 to 3, but only 2 of each type of combat bonus chip may be removed. So what I mean by that, so this next rule entrenchment, if you had entrenchment chips and amphibious assault bonus chips, because you're making a pair drop in conjunction with an amphibious assault, and you drop 2 pair, and let's say you drop 4 sets of planes, or 4 sets of planes, you drop 2, you had 2 planes dropping 4 sets of paratroopers, then they could remove 2 combat bonus chips from the amphibious assault and 2 combat bonus chips from entrenchment. So, and sea transport rules apply to loading and unloading the transport. Entrenchment. So you just heard me say entrenchment a little bit there. So entrenchment is this token right here. Essentially, it is a form of combat bonus chips. So you can place an entrenchment chip, and then you can place up to 5 entrenchment chips on a given territory as a defensive bonus. And so then that way, if you get attacked, these are just chips to soak up hits. They don't attack, but they soak up hits. Caveat to that is you have to have an infantry in that territory to be able to use the entrenchment chips. So if you just got a tank and no infantry, then you really can't use it. Although it can take casualties instead of land units, you need an infantry to take that hit. Yeah, I had to double check my rules there. I didn't see what I was saying, and that confused me. but yeah, so you do have to have defending infantry involved to be able to use the entrenchment chips, but you can use the entrenchment chip for any land unit, any hit off of a land unit. So once again, a nation, once you enable entrenchment, a nation gets 1 entrenchment chip to place per turn on a territory that they control or have an infantry stationed on at the beginning of the turn. So you don't necessarily have to control it. It can be one of your allies, but you got to have a unit on there if it's not going to be yours. You can put up to a max of 5 tokens per territory, and additional tokens besides the 1 free one you get per turn can be purchased for 1 IPC per chip. And the turn that you enable it, you get a home field advantage sub rule of entrenchment. So that means that on the turn you enable it, you get 3. You get 1 chip that goes on your capital territory. You get 1 entrenchment chip that goes on your capital territory. So if you're the Soviets, you put 1 on Moscow, and then you get 3 more to place anywhere you want. You can put the rest of the 3 of them on Moscow. You can put the others on. Put 1 on Leningrad and 1 on Stalingrad. It's up to you, however you want to do it. But you get 3 more chips to kind of put on there, just to kind of make up for that, and just to kind of help you catch up. And if a territory is captured with an entrenchment chip on it, then the entrenchment chip is removed. It doesn't transfer. And really the entrenchment's there to be, to kind of represent defensive bonus of having booby traps, landmines, barbed wire, things like that. That makes it more difficult for the attacker to come in. And of course, as I said earlier with paratroopers, the entrenchment can be reduced with paratroopers. And the final infantry Technologies veteran infantry. And so when you enable veteran infantry, infantry now attack and defend at a +1, and infantry may attack at a 3 on the first round of combat, only on the first round of combat. So you have a veteran infantry that are going into attack, and they have a combined arms with artillery. Then that first round of combat, they can get a 3. They can hit it at a 3. But then that next round of combat, they are back to their veteran infantry status, lets them shoot at a 2. So then that frees up that. So then you have a combined arms scenario where then that first round you may have a combined arms with artillery and infantry, and then the second round you may combine arms with artillery and mechanized infantry, and let the veteran infantry shoot for themselves. Armour Technologies. First one up, mechanized division. So with mechanized division or blitz tactics, this is kind of the classic out of box. Now mechanized infantry can blitz through on their own without tanks, and mechanized infantry can also shoot at 2 if they're paired with a tank or they're paired with an artillery. So they have a choice here of how to get a combined arms with them. The other thing that they can do is that per round they can hook up to the back of the artillery, and they can move it. And they can move it 2 spaces with them, and then attack. That can be a combat move or a non-combat move. They can also move an AA gun 2 spaces on a non-combat move. Pretty simple, straightforward, I feel like. Next technology is self-propelled artillery, SPAs. So this is a new unit. It attacks at 2, defends at 2, moves at 2, costs 5. So on the turn that you enable self-propelled artillery, that nation receives 1 free unit at any industrial complex. And the combined arms of the self-propelled artillery, the SPA can attack at 3 on the first round of combat when paired with a tank. So if a tank comes in, so if it's attacking with a tank, it can shoot at +3. It can shoot at +1 to shoot it to hit at 3 on that first round of combat. +3. Yeah, it hits at 5. Everybody's buying them. Don't know why. Oh, it can blitz with tanks and mechanized infantry, and then as an artillery piece, it's subject to be for combined arms with infantry as well, and then there's and then with it being an artillery piece as well, some of the artillery technologies are applicable to it as well. All right, armor division. Tanks can attack at 4 on the first round of combat when paired with a self-propelled artillery. So now the love goes both directions. So now not only should you bring in a self-propelled artillery with a tank, now that first round of combat is going to be a doozy. The SPA is going to be shooting at 3, and the tank's going to be shooting at 4 for that first round only. Then going round 2, they're going to be back down to 3 and 2. But that shock and awe factor of having 2 armored units coming in, that's what that armored division is really about. Is a kind of a double combined arms, if you want to put it that way. And with that as well, the yeah, like I said, one of the artillery rules also apply to the artillery to the SPA, as I said earlier. I'll cover that rule. Another situation with that when we get to artillery. And then, last but not least, heavy tanks. So there we got the Tiger, and I'll leave the Panther there, kind of so you can see the difference in them. Hold them in my hand. So these are Tiger tanks I got from Historical Board Gaming, and so I got some heavy tanks available for each nation that have in my house rules that can get them. So if you notice, there is this little, I don't know what you call that symbol, double cross thing right there, heavy tanks, and you go down here and it says only USA, UK, USSR, Germany, and Italy can build heavy tanks. That's kind of a twofold reason. Let's go with the in-game reason first. In-game, I don't think ANZAC and Japan, that it's economical for them to build heavy tanks. Because they're going to be doing amphibious assaults, and they're not really going to need heavy tanks because heavy tanks are more defensive tanks. And the other thing as well too, from a real life standpoint, I just didn't want to buy that many more units, so call me cheap. But heavy tanks, rules with heavy tanks. Nations are limited to 5 heavy tank pieces, but no more than 8. So what I'm saying there is you can build up to 8 heavy tanks, but you only got 5 sculpts. So you may have to stack a couple up. I don't have General hand grenades rule of heavy tanks can't, 2 heavy tanks can't be in the same territory. I'm not saying that, but I am saying no more than 8 heavy tanks, period. And let's see, and as I said, only UK, US, USSR, Germany, and Italy can build heavy tanks. Heavy tanks can only be built at major industrial complexes. So that's the one reason there of why I'm not limiting the amount of heavy tanks in the territory. That may be, I may need to. That could be a opportunity for breaking the game, so I may have to limit it. But the main thing is I don't want to limit it to 1. I think you should be allowed to have multiple if you need it. And then on the turn that heavy tanks is enabled, just like self-propelled artillery, you'll get a heavy tank when you enable heavy tanks, but it needs to be placed at somewhere where you have a major industrial complex. That's also another reason why I'm not letting ANZAC build heavy tanks, because they don't have a major industrial complex. And then heavy tanks can be supported by, they can get the bonus of a self-propelled artillery piece, and they also take up 2 slots on sea transports when they're being transported, and if they're on an amphibious assault, they land on the second round of combat, so they don't get that plus. They don't get that 4, that +1, that attack on 4 bonus in the amphibious assault, because it's a heavy tank. They're going to have to clear the beachhead a little bit before they can unload it, type thing. So that's heavy tanks. Aircraft techs, these will go pretty quick. Aircraft production, it requires mass production before you can build aircraft production. But once you enable aircraft production, all aircraft are built at 2 IPC or less. Long-range aircraft, self-explanatory. They're same as out of box. Their range increased by 1. Heavy bombers, self-explanatory, same as out of box. Strategic bombers attack with 2 dice and select the best results. Jet fighters, same as out of box. Fighters attack at 4, and escorts and interceptors hit at 2. Bam. Artillery techs. Veteran artillery. This is the same as advanced artillery and out of box. So artillery and self-propelled artilleries can support 2 units. So they can support 2 infantry, 2 mechanized infantry. Each, or specifically artillery, can support 2 mechanized or 2 infantry, or a combination of, so they can attack at a +1. And with that same rule, SPAs can support 2 tanks on their attack. Pretty slick. Heavy flak next. Heavy flak. So now upgrade to all AAAs. So anti-aircraft artillery can hit at 2 or less now. So it increases that. Heavy flak. Advanced anti-aircraft radar. This rule is a little bit different, but I think I like it, and I think it's kind of fun. But air bases gain radar installations, and within the territories of air bases, AAA can turn away aircraft, which is on a roll of 3. And turn away, I mean the aircraft doesn't do a strategic bombing raid. It doesn't participate in combat. It just goes to the legal landing spot that should have been identified prior to it taking off, as all good players should do. Land units. So this only applies to the AAA land units, not cruisers in adjacent sea zones. But the land units in the same territory, the land anti-aircraft guns in the same territory as an air base, can see, quote unquote, see into the adjacent territory, and it can turn away enemy aircraft on a 1 or less. So that one may be a little bit harder to explain, but say you had sorry, I'm trying to see my screen. So say you had anti-aircraft gun in France, and the UK is coming back to take Normandy. Well, you can elect to let this AAA, fire at the strategic bomber coming into Normandy. Now, the only thing he can do is turn him away. So if he rolls a 1, then the strategic bomber goes back to wherever he was, or maybe he was going to fly down to North Africa. I don't know. We'll just say he goes back to where he was going. So he can do that and attack on 1. But of course, all your combat moves are going to be identified anyways. But now this AAA has to continue to defend that space. He can't defend anything coming into France. He has to defend Normandy on a 1. So just a little something extra, it's probably going to be more in play for a situation where you have Warsaw and Berlin, and the Allies are attacking Berlin, and you feel like you need a little extra air cover. But nonetheless, we put that one in. So that's the turn away of the ability of the adjacent territory with the advanced radar, because the radar can see farther, essentially. And then also because the radar can see out farther, air bases can scramble 5 aircraft now. Because they have better radar, they see the attack coming sooner, so they can get more planes ready. And finally, the final artillery technology is rocket bases, and I do rocket bases a little bit different than out of box. So I use the I think this was 1942 spring 1942, so not 1942 second edition. Still had these older AA guns. So I use these to depict rocket bases, just because they're different. Because everything else have the nation specific AAs. So we use these as rocket bases. So with the rocket base, same thing. You get a free rocket base on the turn you enable it, and rocket bases can be used to fire on facilities up to 3 spaces away, and a maximum of 1 rocket base per target per attack. And the rocket attack hits on a 2, and then you roll 1d6 for damage after that. So rocket bases are not units, they're facilities, and they may be captured if their territory is captured. However, capturing a rocket base does not enable the rocket base tech. So if Germany doesn't have rocket bases and they take a territory with rocket bases, that they just have that one rocket base. They can't start building rocket bases on their own. And rocket bases cost 7, and they can take 7 damage, and they're destroyed at 8, and there's no movement. And of course they can be repaired for 1 IPC each, but as I said, they're destroyed with 8 damage. And that was rocket bases. Naval techs, Naval Production, same as out of box shipyard improvements. That's in your rule book, but I require mass production, just like aircraft production. I require you to have mass production enabled before you're able to enable naval production. Naval techs. So naval techs or super sub / AAA cruisers. So super sub portion, subs can attack at 3, and then the AAA cruiser portion, cruisers gain AAA ability on defense, and they follow the AAA rules, including heavy flak, but as I said earlier, not advanced AA radar. Cruisers may not be a traditional cruiser and a AAA cruiser in the same combat round. So if you're defending, if your cruisers are sitting out in the middle of the ocean and somebody brings in a bunch of fighters and tactical bombers to attack them, well, you have to pick whether for that first round, or are you going to have him fire as a AAA, or are you going to have him fire as a cruiser? So if he fires as a AAA, then that's kind of that still the AAA firing round, and then he can be taken as a casualty in that first round of combat, and then the second round of combat he can resume being a cruiser and firing on that round, but he just can't, the same combat round, he can't fire both. He can't get 2 shots, which I feel is fairly obvious, but some people need that spelled out. And they cannot defend a scramble as a AAA and then attack other naval units as well. So kind of that same thing. You can't scramble if you're making an amphibious assault and somebody scrambles fighters and they have a destroyer in the facility. You got to pick. You can't scramble planes and fight the sea battle on that first round of combat. And if scrambled against, 1 cruiser may roll 2d6. Just from an aspect of, I don't want to completely break the game and say all the cruisers can fire, because most scrambles are only going to be 3 planes. So if you can roll 3 dice, you're going to knock out the entire scramble. I don't want the defender that's scrambling to lose all want to scramble. So only 2 D6s, and still that's hitting out of 1 or best of 2. So that's going to be kind of tough. All right, next one, heavy cargo. So with heavy cargo, transports can carry 3 units, consisting of 1 infantry plus any 2 land units. So here, you can essentially carry your heavy tank plus an infantry, or you can carry 2 tanks and an infantry. You can carry 3 infantry. You can carry an infantry and a mech and a tank, infantry, artillery and a tank. Whatever. You get the drift. 3 units total. 1 infantry plus 2 plus any 2 land units. So I think that could be very beneficial for some of the Western powers that are going to be island hopping and so on and so forth. Essentially, for every 2 crews, this is buy 2 transports, get 1 free. And then finally, offshore bombardment. Said that kind of funny. So with offshore bombardment, destroyers may offshore bombard with a 1. So hey, added destroyers into the mix, not just battleships and cruisers, but still pretty weak though. Battleships, cruisers, and destroyers may bombard a coastal territory or an island in support of an attack from other units. So an amphibious assault is no longer a requirement for bombardment. So if you were just having, so let's go up here for a minute and save the, so I have this set up, but didn't have any pieces. Didn't put any pieces out, but let's just say the Allies are attacking Holland from France. They've retaken France, and they're attacking Belgium from France. Well, if there's a cruiser sitting out here, he could fire, even though there may not be a transport making an amphibious assault. That's no longer a requirement. And then with offshore bombardment, division of forces, such as in my house rules of amphibious assaults, can create, or a sea battle can create a division of forces, such as in my house rule. Kind of started to state that wrong. So if you have a cruiser and battleship and destroyer sitting in water, or sitting in a sea zone, and they're about to bombard, but the enemy has something sitting there, that creates a sea battle first. That doesn't completely negate the offshore bombardment, but you do have to resolve the sea battle, and if you lose a sea battle, you can't do a bombardment. Similar to my house rules with amphibious assaults. So that concludes my technologies, and that concludes my series on my house rules. So hopefully you enjoyed it. I would love to take comments and feedback on it, and your thoughts, and what if you think this is a good set of rules or not. I've played tested it, but I haven't played tested it to the point we're just completely trying to break it. We've play tested it to make sure it's fun and it's doing what we want, but haven't had hours and hours of play test on it. So it's there can definitely be some holes in it, but yeah, hopefully you enjoy it, and subscribe if you like it, and let me know what your thoughts are. Thanks.